What's going on, folks? Welcome to Stu's Garage. Today we're going to be working on a 2013 M6, and we're going to be doing we're basically lowering the suspension. So most of the times on a car, when you lower the suspension, you can do a set of springs or a set of coilovers. This is actually neither, and I'll go ahead and show you why this is different and why I actually wanted to show this to you guys. Is because this car actually has on it adjustable dampening settings and stuff. You can dial it in through the dashboard, and KW does make a system that fully replaces that, and that system is like almost $4,000. Nobody wants to pay that just to get low. So what this does is this actually retains the factory struts, which you don't actually need to throw out because they're really good struts, and this is almost equivalent to like a sleeve kit. So basically what you do is you take the perches off of the old struts, you replace it with these perches. You got some nice KW springs here. We're going to do all of that for you today. So really this is similar to a sleeve kit install. But anyways, we're going to be doing it here on this 2013. And there are a few good videos out there. I will post them, the videos that I watched in order to get information for this. I'll post those down below to give credit to the folks who actually gave me information. So what we've done so far is we've jacked the car up on both sides, even though we're only going to do one side at a time. I've found that whenever you're working on the suspension of a car, it's always good to jack up both sides of that axle, because when you go to remove your end links, when there's tension on them, because the weight is on one side, it's almost impossible to get those things out. I mean, like it's really frustrating. If you jack the car up and let both wheels hang, the end links will just hang there and you can unscrew them easily. So alright, so we've already got one side done. It looks really cool in there, almost done, and I'll mention exactly why we left that slightly unfinished. So we're gonna go ahead and start on the other side. The first one is always more difficult to do because you got to figure things out, and there's a little bit different stuff that you got to do on this car. The process is generally the same, just the way you got to do things is a little bit different. So there's only a couple of things that you need to disconnect. First thing is going to be your sway bar end link, and in order to get your sway bar end links in and out, it's best to have that entire axle up off of the ground, because if you have your end links in different positions, like the weight is on one car because you only jacked one side of the car up, you're gonna have a really hard time getting your end link out and back in. If you jack both sides up, it basically the load is off of it and it's free floating. So there's a process to get that off, which I'll show you in just a second. The next thing is the upper ball joint. There's a process to get that off. And down here, where are we? This is the bottom of the strut, and that's straightforward as far as getting that off. Okay guys, so sway bar end links on any car can be somewhat of a tricky process to get off, because there's a nut here, but normally that nut will spin. So there's multiple ways to skin a cat. What I'll be doing here is I'll be using a pass-through ratchet. This is a really awesome ratchet set. I got this set, I've never used it until now, so I've had it actually for a while, and you know, surprise surprise, there's several tools that I'll be using for the first time on this car that I've had for a long time. So anyways, you got your pass-through socket, and sorry for the angles guys, but this is the only way I'm going to be able to do this. And I'm going to use my Torx bit to hold that in place, because the end of the end link is a Torx bit thingy. So anyways, I'm going to use my Torx bit to hold it in place just to keep it from spinning, and I'm going to go ahead and ratchet this thing. And we've got the nut off. There's no tension on the end link. There's a little bit of tension, but there you go. That just pops out of there like that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get this ball joint loose, and as you can see, that's a reverse Torx bit. My next tool that I've had forever and never used. And it's a regular nut on the other side, thank goodness. And just for reference purposes, that's a 14 millimeter. You could use a wrench, but I've got a ratchet on both sides. It doesn't really matter. Now, even though this piece does come pretty loose right here, and you can kind of see it moving. It gets caught up, and you kind of have to tap it out. I'm just going to tap this thing out with the back of my ratchet. Now we're not going to try to pull this guy out just yet. I want to go ahead and detach the strut from the lower control arm, because that's going to allow us to pull on this a little bit more. It's not going to give us so much resistance in the opposite direction. And I'm not going to show you that. That's just one big bolt you got to remove. Nothing special there. Okay, next up is pretty much the hardest part of this whole process up front. To get this ball joint out, it's got a little Torx bit here, and I don't know what the textbook method is, but basically I just stick the little Torx bit in here and twist this thing back and forth, and that just helps it to slide out. It's not threaded or anything like that. I did put some PB Blaster on it earlier today, and pretty much you just have to sit here and work this thing back and forth until you can get it to slide in and out. And it's actually a lot easier to get back in, but this is the only way you're going to get this thing out. So it's going to be a struggle. I'm not going to show you guys this whole thing because I'm going to be sweating by the time this is over. Alright, so we got the upper ball joint loose. That was about a 20-minute battle. I went ahead and cleaned it off, but it was really crusty and cruddy from just like dirt and excess aluminum or whatever else. That's what makes it really difficult to get off. So we got that loose. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to release the shock from the top. Just like what you would see normally on most cars is 3 bolts. The only big difference is these bolts go down. Normally bolts come up from the strut and you just take a nut off. The other thing is this is your electronic damper control. So this boot actually should pop off pretty easily. And then there's this electronic plug down here. And alright, so this boot actually pops off pretty easily. The next thing you're going to see if you pull that back a little bit is there's this plug down here that plugs into the top of the strut, and that comes off fairly easily as well. You just pull on it, and we're going to go ahead and buzz the shocks free. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab hold of this last one so that the shock doesn't go flying out from the bottom. So from here, now that everything's free, all you got to do is just basically carefully shimmy this shock free. You're going to have to push down the control arm a little bit to get it over top of the control arm, and then it'll come down straight from the bottom. Alright, next we're going to disassemble the shock. A lot of people like to use spring compressors for this step. On other cars, for this car in particular, you don't need it, but I tend not to use spring compressors on anything just because they're really frustrating to use. And common misconception that your spring is going to fly off and go kill somebody. When you pop these things loose, yeah, they do pop a little bit, but they only push out, you know, maybe 1 or 2 inches. They don't go flying. Parts don't go flying. You're not going to get injured. The worst thing you might do is if you got your finger in the wrong place, you might smash your finger, maybe. And it's only going to sting for a second. You're not going to break skin. You're not going to get any kind of grievous injuries from not using spring compressors when you disassemble a shock. So I know that's the textbook way to do it. I'm telling you guys, you don't really need to do it that way. Alright, so in order to get this loose, there's one nut up top. It's an 18mm nut right here. And if you have a 12 point or 16 point, whatever point this is, a deep 18mm socket, that's what you're going to want for this in particular. This one's a little bit longer than normal, but it's not fully a deep socket. This barely gets the job done, so it fits over there. What I do is I have that all the way down in the socket, and what I do is I just don't clip the impact gun in all the way. It's not clipped into the actual socket. So we're just gonna go ahead and back this thing out. there you go. That's as much as the spring is going to fly off, guys. So now you can go ahead and start disassembling your strut. You will be reusing most of these parts. Once you get this disassembled, you're going to want to mark where you have this mount for your sway bar end links, and I'm just going to make 2 lines here just to show that that little mount lines up right between these 2 lines. If you can see there, that's the way it goes. And this thing is pressed on. The technical way you're supposed to do this is you're supposed to somehow fit this entire shock into a hydraulic press while not compressing your piston down here. I don't know who has those kind of tools, but I don't. So this is our hydraulic press for today. And you don't want to set this down on the ground because you could potentially damage it that way. So you're just going to want to hold it up in the air and give this thing a few whacks going all the way around, and it'll come through. And you know, depending on how hard you hit it, it'll start to come loose in like about 10 hits. Alright, so that was a little bit more than 10 hits, maybe like 11 hits, but it comes loose. One thing that I forgot to tell you guys is you do want to hit this thing with some penetrating oil. I did that earlier today, so you guys didn't see me do that step. So I'm going to go ahead and wipe this off, and we're going to go ahead and mount the new sleeve or perch or whatever you want to call it on here, and I'll show you that. Alright, so this is your new perch. Make sure you have the correct one for the correct side. It has this little indentation here, and this little indentation right here actually lines up perfectly to your end link. So just make sure you have the correct one on the correct side. I didn't put the springs side by side, but I believe they actually coil in different directions. So you're not going to actually be able to fit it onto your top hats if you have the wrong side anyways, I think. But definitely look in the instructions. If you find nothing else useful in the instructions, it's going to tell you which side is which, because most of the instructions are in German, and I don't know German. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking these little set screws out, and I'm assuming, since they're so small, I'm assuming that they just kind of hold things in place temporarily, because I can't really see these things doing much as far as, you know, several thousand pounds of car pushing down on them. These things actually hold on by the collar on the inside. So if you look in there, you can see that ring. There's actually 2 different diameters. This thing slides down on your strut just like so, and it actually lines up to this shoulder right here. And also I'm going to make sure that I have this tab, and also I'm going to make sure I have this tab lined up to my lines, which don't really need to show you guys on the camera. Just make sure that you have your lines lined up. I'm going to go ahead and tighten down my set screws. And everything is actually on here pretty solid. So next up, we're going to go ahead and throw the spring back on, and the small side goes down first. You don't put anything on underneath the spring. You definitely want to make sure that you put the new bump stops on. Based on the way this is designed, I believe that the little bumps go facing up. I'm going to pause before I do this. I'm a huge advocate of using dust boots and things like that, but this kit doesn't really have provisions for using a dust boot. And honestly, if I was just doing a stew style build, I would just throw this back on here the way that it already is. But according to the Dynon website, these things are actually tuned based on the suspension. So I'd rather have the tuned bump stop than the dust shield one. And so I guess this dust shield has to go away. It's not part of the new design. I tried to transfer the dust shield on the other side, it just came apart. So I'm pretty much going to be running without a dust shield. It's not made to fit this this new bump stop, so I'm going to have to ditch the dust shield. So that bump stop goes on there like so. Your spring cushion, or whatever you call this thing, goes on next, and that actually lines up to the spring to keep everything nice and level. And then your top hat's going to go on. Now the orientation of this top hat is important because it only bolts in one way, but the cool thing is you can actually turn this thing once it's all tightened down, because it's probably not going to be lined up correctly when you first put it on. And the last thing for us to do is to go ahead and put our nut back on and tighten everything together. So now we're going to go ahead and throw this back in the car. It's pretty much the same as it was, except in reverse. The only tip I want to give you guys is basically what I said in the beginning. Right now the other side is still disconnected. I never connected up the sway bar end link on the other side, just because it's good to have those both even. And the other tip I want to give you for reassembly is the first thing you should do is to bolt this back to the lower control arm, because if you wait to do that, you're going to be fighting the spring and other things, and it's just going to be a pain to line up. So we're going to bolt this in first, bolt everything else up, push it up, bolt everything in from the top, and the front of the car will be done.